chance to go in and talk about it.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for joining today's webinar, celebrating International Women's Day, Give to Gain. I'm just going to go through a bit of housekeeping before I hand you over. So if everybody, obviously you can have your camera on, if you just could turn your microphones off, that would be great. So the webinar will be about 1 hour. As always, it will be recorded and we will upload it to the library section and onto CPD On Demand later on, and in a couple of days it'll be up on CPD On Demand. I don't have the CPD code yet, but as soon as I have that, I will obviously send it on to everybody. So obviously I'd like to hand you over there today to Kathy Farragher, who is a member of Compliance Institute's D&I Committee and also Head of Compliance CRO and MLRO at Deutsche Leasing Ireland. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for taking the time to join our event today. I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to you all on our celebration of International Women's Day. So this event is celebrated on the 8th of March each year, and it provides a platform for individuals, organisations and community to engage in activities related to women's issues. By way of introduction, as Fiona has mentioned, my name is Kathy Farragher. I have been passionate about making a difference in diversity and inclusion since my undergraduate days in Galway. On a personal level, I also have 2 young children, a boy and a girl, and it's important for me to leave a legacy. On days like this, it's important to challenge stereotypes and dismantle them as early as possible, as we are all part of the solution for developing a more equitable society. Every one of us has a role to play in addressing issues which may arise in the community, regardless of whether it directly affects you or not. And this is why I, as a female, am delighted to champion this discussion around International Women's Day. If you have any questions, please put them in the question box and we will get to them at the end of the session. And I look forward to a lively and insightful discussion. So what are we hoping to achieve here today? Well, in case you're not aware, the theme for International Women's Day 2026 is Give to Gain. It encourages a mindset of generosity and collaboration, because when we give, we gain. This emphasizes the power of reciprocity and support. When people, organizations, and communities give generously, opportunities and support for women increase. Giving is not a subtraction, it's intentional multiplication. When women thrive, we all rise. Whether this is through shared knowledge, resources, infrastructure, visibility, advocacy, education, training, mentoring, or time, contributing to women's advancement helps create a more supportive and interconnected world. We can all give our support to gain advancements for women and girls. As individuals, giving support means calling out stereotypes, challenging discrimination, questioning bias, celebrating women's success, and more. Sharing our knowledge and encouragement with others is also key. Giving our support to help advance gender equality reinforces a sense of connection and purpose. This creates an important ripple effect for spreading impact. International Women's Day is a movement. This special day of impact belongs to all groups everywhere. And that's what makes International Women's Day so inclusive, not exclusive. So now I'd like to turn to Anya Hickey, President of the Compliance Institute. Welcome, Anya. I was hoping that you might be able to give us an insight into yourself, your career journey, and how you got here.
Sure, thanks, Kathy. And just a quick reminder to everyone, I think just a few people still to pop themselves on mute for the duration, and then we can enable sound and Q&A towards the end if that's okay. So yeah, in terms of career journey, have been volunteering with the Compliance Institute for many years now, and would have began that journey probably back in one of my first roles in financial services, which I fell into very much accidentally on moving to Dublin. hadn't intentionally sought out a role in compliance and risk and governance, but it was where my career journey started, and certainly where I felt it played to my strengths. And in that very first role, I was very fortunate to have highly supportive managers and teams around me, I guess, who kind of made me believe I could do whatever it was I wanted to set my mind to. And I think that was really important in terms of progressing in those early days. And I can remember even then taking a moment to kind of step back and observe how the different genders operated in that office and how different they were, right? And they were, there was no wrong or right, but the way I noticed male and female employees approaching different tasks differ. And I guess I made a conscious decision back then, maybe to adapt a blend of the best of both to the extent that was authentic for me in terms of going forward. And it's interesting to look back at that, having, I guess, made a gradual change in how I approach things myself since then. So that was kind of my start and my introduction to compliance, regulation and financial services.
Thank you. It's funny, just to echo that. I mean, like, you know, nobody grows up as a 5-year-old and says, you know, mommy, I want to work in the field of compliance. So similar to yourself, I truly fell into compliance. When I was straight out of college, like many of you, I was just throwing as many CVs out there as I possibly could, and just, you know, seeing what stuck and where I got an interview. And funnily enough, one ad caught my eye, and it was for a compliance role at a company. It's gone now, but it was called Interpolis. And I thought to myself, as a young lady, I was like, amazing, Interpol, I can help to fight crime, the naivety. Cut to the interview when I realized that they were actually an insurance company. And I pivoted fast, somehow got the job. And as they say, the rest is history. But the reason I reference that story is because, in all seriousness, I think that often there is a preconception that women who move into leadership positions, you know, have their career meticulously planned out. But often, honestly, it's just a combination of luck, hard work, and the right job coming up at the right time. It's often not just a straight linear path, in my experience anyway.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kathy. And I guess that takes me on to my next move, which didn't really follow that upward, I guess, traditional trajectory you might have in your mind. I took a lateral move after that first role I fulfilled. It was very difficult to move on because I was very happy and well supported in the role I was in. But for me, I guess I got a better understanding of myself and what I liked and disliked in a workplace. And I noticed I have strong generalist tendencies. I like to have a broader knowledge of a multitude of things rather than to specialize. And I think getting that understanding of yourself is really important to your career and your ultimate happiness. So it was with that self-awareness in mind that I took that lateral move and went into a consultancy role, which gave me huge exposure across a range of different sectors. Working with a very large network of individuals and some quite entrepreneurial partners and individuals, which is really great to see it more closely to a commercial side, I suppose, in terms of going out there and providing those consultancy support services. And to be honest, it's one of the best moves I made, which is really interesting when you think it wasn't like a traditional upward trajectory as such. It was more a horizontal move to increase my coverage and gain a better understanding, albeit I did find myself continually drawn back to the sector and the area where I started out in any case, but I still think I would rate it as one of the best moves I made.
It's funny as well because it's a little bit similar to me as well. Some of you might know that I'm actually a qualified corporate solicitor, which takes years of exams and traineeships. And when you do qualify, you're like, brilliant, you know, on paper you've arrived, but pretty quick, even during my training, I realized that it wasn't really the life for me. And it can be very hard to turn your back on a career where you've invested time and money. But I think a message I would like to deliver is that it's absolutely okay to try new things and to pivot. Often it is the best way to grow. And like you said, careers are not straight lines. In my experience, they're absolutely a series of experiments, adjustments, and discoveries. Each time I tried something new, I found opportunities which, frankly, I would not have encountered if I stayed where I was. What I would emphasize to anybody is that if you are feeling the pull to explore a different path, for you to trust that instinct, and listen, if it's not right, you know, it's not the end of the world. Nothing is permanent, but certainly to trust yourself and where you think that the future might take you.
Yeah, it's interesting, Kathy, when you say that. I remember the words of someone when I left that very first role that I adored so much and was so hesitant to leave. They said to me, "This isn't your last move, it's your next move." And it's like a weight lifted from me when they said that, because it implied, you know, change in the future again. So I think possibly had a tendency to think very absolutist, like it's A or B, but it's not. That's the next step, and you can move on from there again. And I think with that thinking, it really helped kind of lift the pressure I have of choosing A or B and move on. And I think central to that, then from then on in, I saw people becoming increasingly important in my decision making. So I think maybe in your early days of your career, it's more about the role and exposure to certain technical areas. And then it becomes less about that and more about who am I working with? What are their values? Do I feel they'll support me in getting to the place I want to be in a number of years' time? And I think that certainly became the conversation I would have if recruiters approached me, or if anyone individual approached me. Who are the people behind this proposition? What are they about? And is there an alignment there? And I think when we were speaking before this event, I mentioned there's been one or two managers in the past who I found incredibly refreshing and open in my very early days in joining their organizations, because the conversation immediately went to what I want to do next, despite the fact that both of those individuals, one a male CEO and one a female CEO, saying to me in the early days of my joining the organization, tell me what your 5-year plan is, where would you like to be, and how can we be there to get you to where you want to be then, whether that is still with this organization internally, or if that is beyond the scope of what we can accommodate, then let's get the best out of our relationship and be very transparent about what our intentions are. And I just found that so refreshing and loyalty building, because I knew I could speak openly and be very clear about what did and didn't work for me and my wider team. And I think that type of attitude was really, really positive to have exposure to.
Yeah. Just to echo that as well, so little in work is accomplished in isolation by just one person, especially when we work in a support function like ourselves. The more senior your position, as you've mentioned, definitely teamwork and collaboration becomes even more important. Earlier on in my career, and I think I was quite naive, because I've always been sort of applauded by my technical skill set. And early on, I felt, well, I have this great technical skill set. Why aren't I progressing? And I think what I didn't have is the visibility that is purely just really one piece of a wider puzzle. And to truly progress, that you need to be a people person. You need to be able to influence both for your team and for your other stakeholders. In one place I worked, a story that I have is that there was a particular piece of advice that had been sought from myself, and I gave the dreaded answer in compliance, and I said no. And I explained exactly the reason why I said no, and it was a firm no. You know, they just were taking it. And eventually they went to an external firm who supported them from time to time. They brought in the big wigs, charged a lot of money, and thankfully, I wouldn't be sharing this story if it was the opposite, but thankfully the big wigs said the same, and they said, no, you know, you're absolutely right. They reiterated what I said. And initially I was really aggrieved by that, right? And I took it personally, but I don't think I should have, because I think looking back in my career, what that was is I was purely focusing on my advice and that my advice was correct. But I think that in that respect, and at that stage in my career, what I hadn't developed was the the leadership qualities to bring people on the journey with you, so that when I was providing, even though it was the correct answer, I hadn't sold it to them in such a way that they trusted and that they stood behind me in that particular decision. So for me, I think it was a bit of a lesson in terms of the fact that it's not purely just a technical development that is required, but that you need to lean into the softer skills, the negotiation, the influencing, building your relationships, etc.
Absolutely agree. And that kind of powerful stakeholder management and positioning your views, giving early heads up of the way you're thinking, bringing people on side, all of that kind of offline activity, I'd nearly describe it as, that you don't really appreciate. And that as you mature in your career, you understand the dynamics at play and why it might be better to grab a quick coffee and sound out how you're thinking. And, you know, I suppose let it land a little more gently, maybe. Then I guess we can be quite black and white sometimes in terms of that's not allowed, I can move on. But it's bringing other people on that journey and into your mindset and in a regulator's mindset in terms of why you're thinking that way. And definitely learned similar lessons, Kathy, to yourself. I think as you were speaking there as well, it made me think of, you know, you're saying you're really strong technical, but it's like a really good book or film. If nobody knows about it, how can they appreciate it or do anything with it? So it's that personal brand maintenance. I think brand, I don't love the word, but it's the word I hear used around it. So being very conscious of your own personal profile as distinct from your role. And I often think if we could take moments in our career like mid-year reviews, annual reviews, not just to think about how you're discharging the objectives for the firm, but how are you getting along in terms of your own development? Are you getting where you need to be? Are there areas you want to target exposure to? Are there areas where you could empower somebody else by delegating, where maybe you've gotten to a point where you're super comfortable and it's not necessarily serving your growth any longer? So I think that's a really important thing. And I try and encourage friends and colleagues that, you know, they have their CV with them when they're doing those mid-year reviews, when they're doing their year end, and looking to update it and see what they've added and seeing if that alignment is there and what more they want to focus on. So for me, those two things should work in partnership, and it might help you understand if you're not entirely comfortable with where you're at in terms of your role. It might shine a light on, actually, I'd really like to get some exposure to this type of regulation or that type of team, and it can really help. So I think that's really important to have that dual mindset of yourself and your own profile raising and also discharging your objectives.
Yeah, and I think that in terms of keeping abreast of your own CV and your own developments, what I would say for anybody throughout their entire career is to never stop learning. I have so many, I have done so many exams, I could nearly do them now with the blindfold on. But that is because, as anybody in this profession is aware of, the rules and the regulations, they keep changing. And it's absolutely imperative, I think, that you keep on top of these developments. As many of you are aware, there are excellent courses out there. Some of them are subsidized, where that can really help not only with your technical skill set, but also, I would say, with your professional development, because often through coursework, team projects, lectures, etc., you get to develop your own network, which sometimes can stand the test of time even more so than the lecture notes, which, you know, you might refer to, you know, once or twice or something going forwards. But I think absolutely in terms of the modern way of working, I think that continuing your professional development is really just a no-brainer now at this stage. Hopefully, I think that through the items that we've discussed just now, might have given the attendees a little bit more and insight into our career paths to date. So what we might do now is just change tact a little bit. Given that we have the theme of this year as Give to Gain, what I might say is let's explore what that concept might look like in everyday practice for individuals that are attending on this call. From my own very personal perspective, some of you might have heard me speaking before and might know that my son was extremely ill when he was young. and I was still on maternity leave at that point. And I approached my employer about taking extended time off as a carer, not only once, but actually twice. I pushed it out more than once. I have no doubt looking back that it caused a logistical nightmare for them. But when I did these requests, thank God, but I was met with nothing but compassion and accommodation. To be very honest, I was really on the fence at that point in time about returning to work at all. And I think that if I had been met with a different response, a more guarded response, then I could have easily called it a day on my professional career, at least for a while anyway. So by giving me that flexibility at that point, I was able to stay in the workforce, and I was able to keep delivering for them as an employer. Also, I absolutely, and to this day, I felt a great loyalty to that employer for many years to come. So I do think that it ultimately was a win-win situation. For me, I haven't needed to make a decision between choosing my career or choosing my family. From my perspective, and everybody may have different beliefs, and that's fine, I do believe that you can have it all, but I don't think that you can necessarily have it all at exactly the same time. I think that there are different seasons in your career, there are different seasons in life, and sometimes one portion might take priority, and another time another sector might take priority. For me, this was an important change in mindset. I don't know about yourself, Anya. What do you think like giving to gain looks like for you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good example, Kathy. And I think flexibility is an easy win where, look, there's times when it can't work, and that can be difficult for an employer and an employee. But where it can at all, I think it's hugely powerful. Particularly in terms of, we think of hybrid working, remote working. I think oftentimes it's less about that binary decision and more about the flexibility and the accommodation, particularly where if you have a good employee who you know will give back in spades, right, and where the trust is there. I think that's really important. But I think when we were preparing for this just chat today, we spoke about recognition, and I think it's something that maybe we could do better on, maybe as a culture. I think maybe it's less so an Irish thing to applaud people and call them out for being great. I know certainly like my US counterparts be very good at that, right? And I think it's something it's a phrase I've used a lot with myself, is to make a practice of it. And I think particularly when you're more senior, that, you know, to call out and acknowledge those that are training and developing where they are really good. So a bit to our point earlier, where somebody's looking to profile raise, but there's only a certain amount they can do themselves. You know, it's having cheerleaders elsewhere across your sector or organization who will say, have you noticed Kathy, she's doing an excellent job, we should look at, you know, maybe getting her involved on X project or Y initiative. I think that's hugely important. So I've certainly made a conscious effort in recent years to call people out and give them some really tangible recognition. Some organizations have actual, you know, different ways of doing that recognition, being it, you know, employee of the year or quarter or some sort of monetary acknowledgement. So making use of those types of avenues to, and not underestimate the power it has for the individual, because the individual might think, well, I'm grand and not anything special, and actually maybe you do think they're quite exceptional, and their confidence is usually boosted by hearing that from a third party. And I suppose really importantly, not just letting them know, because that's great, but if their manager doesn't know, then like that's even better. A quick email to their manager saying how well they did or how much you value their input, I think is hugely important.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely, I think it's a cultural thing where you just feel like you can't toot your own horn, you know. Yeah. Definitely in Ireland, and definitely as a woman, that's something that resonates with me. I absolutely think that visibility and promoting visibility of others is an unbelievable form of giving, especially, as you say, when people are not in the room, and giving them credit where credit is due. And in that respect as well, I think we need to reflect on how far we've come on our journey, especially with respect to International Women's Day. There has been a historic lack of awareness and visibility of women's achievements. Like many of you on this call, I hope I'm not alone, but I'm a bit of a nerd. So yesterday I was on LinkedIn, and you follow all of these different people. So I'm connected with the European Commission, and yesterday they had a very interesting post in support of International Women's Day. And it spoke about how history loves a genius. It just forgot to mention that she's a woman. And some of the examples that they gave that I had no idea about include the likes of Martha Gautier, who found Down syndrome's extra chromosome. And in recognition of that, her boss got the Nobel Prize. They also spoke about Janet Sobel, who pioneered drip painting. Jason Pollock, who many of you will know, he copied it and was acclaimed a genius. So I think that it's important in today's day and age that we make a continued effort to ensure that women get the credit that they deserve. I think realistically, instances like that, really, I can't see that happening today. But what I have certainly observed, which again I don't say is intentional, and again it might have got to do with culture, but I have certainly been in meetings where maybe one woman raised a point, and for one reason or another it might seem to have gone over everybody else's head. And then you'll see that exact same point, a moment or two later, maybe referenced by another male colleague, and then all of a sudden everybody is nodding in support. A practical tip that I have, whenever I encounter that, and I have, is to say very gently, not condescending at all, but just to say, for example, let's call it Jim. Jim, that's a great point. I see that you've elaborated on what Anya has said. Anya, do you have anything further that you'd like to add to that? And I think that these little small ways and gestures that we can have to make sure that there is a full visibility for women in terms of the ways in which they work, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely agree, Kathy. And I think something we haven't mentioned as well is maybe that sense of giving something back and what that gives you in return, I guess. And for me, giving something back has always been something strong internally that I wanted to do, having come through early career days not really knowing the sector I'd fallen into and the world of compliance and risk, and having gone through a really well supported educational program with the Compliance Institute, I felt very much that I was keen to give back and help those that came next to understand a little quicker and better how to navigate that world. So I think that's always been really rewarding for me, and I think it's important to have a longer term focus. Can you also hear me? Sorry. Yeah. Okay, great. Just freeing his goes in. Just, to have a focus on the longer term value reward. We can be sometimes a little short term in our thinking, but like if I think back to starting with the Compliance Institute and volunteering with them, I would never have expected the amount I've gotten out of it in terms of experience, connections, how it's developed right up to having the privilege now of serving as president. I would never have envisaged that. And I think if you've kind of more of a short-term view on life, you probably don't appreciate how much you can gain. I think also to be aware of the unexpected benefits of giving back, that you might think, okay, I'll volunteer on this because something might happen, but actually what happens could be completely different and lead to you connecting with somebody that you work with in the future that turns out to be hugely positive. So it's like we kind of predetermine the outcomes without realizing the outcome is potentially very broad, and the benefits also could be very wide ranging. And I think it's important to think of success in a more rounded sense, in terms of, like, for me, the most important things are your health, time, family and friends, like above all else. So it's only natural that I think if you're giving to gain, your sense of fulfillment is higher than anything else. I think that feeling of human connection and supporting others is really powerful. And just on that note, I guess I'd encourage people to focus on more diverse corporate events, I guess, in terms of getting people involved and generating that community. I think there's kind of traditional event types that we have, and maybe a little more representative of male genders, and it was interesting to see in recent years, I think with the rise in IWD as a celebration, and more female leadership, this pivot towards maybe more female attending events, that, you know, and it's a better diversity, and I think getting more people involved. So it's good to see that that change happening.
Yeah. Go on, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, just on there's a huge area we haven't talked about, Kathy, and it probably links really well into the Give to Gain theme, is that the scope in the area of mentorship, sponsorship, and strong leadership. I think that's been central to me, as I guess a scaffolding to build my career and my progression on. I was really happy to be able to support the establishment of the mentorship program within the Compliance Institute. We're now into our second run of that program, with the third iteration to be kicked off later this year. And I think hugely positive feedback from that. And you hear anecdotes of people, you know, having really made changes in their career and career moves, and having gained access to events and people they wouldn't otherwise have had. So I think that's really where you see it having a life-changing impact, which is really important, I think. And for me, those types of programs are the ones I very rarely, if ever, have declined. Whenever I've been asked, would you give some time to mentor, or would you like to get involved in this coaching, it's just been a yes for me, because I can see how valuable and how rewarding it is. And just on coaching in particular, just to make people aware that there are universities and colleges out there that do training for people who want to become executive career coaches, and they do look for volunteers who want to be trained by that trainee, because they have a certain number of hours of training they need to do in order to qualify. So it's worth keeping an eye out for those types of opportunities. And for me, it's like important to take time to have that space where you're thinking longer term and more about yourself. And I think mentorships and coaching opportunities, they really help with that. And equally, delighted to see returnship programs happening more. It wasn't something I had the benefit of participating in, having returned from maternity leave a couple of times. But if you were out equally on carers leave or anything else, I think it can really help to have a community around you, to take the edge off coming back into the corporate world, for you to stay connected and to feel like that transition isn't as much of a shock, and that you have support around you of others going through that, because it can be difficult when you've stepped out for a time to transition back in. So again, very happy to have had the opportunity to support and see more returnship programs coming on stream. I guess I've also heard the term used, having your own board of directors, and I think that's really good advice. Having a really diverse range of mentors that you can call upon, and as you said earlier, Kathy, different seasons in your life. You know, you never know when someone that you saw experience something could be of real help to you in going through a similar situation. So for me, it's really valuable to have those contacts and be able to pick up the phone and say, look, I know you experienced something like this. How did you resolve it? And, you know, a problem shared is truly a problem halved. So having that population of people to call upon, and I think we spoke about this before, Kathy, in terms of it feels less compartmentalizing your personal life and your professional life, and more like your professional life is also a community of friendships and networks where they support you through, you know, good and bad. And for me, the experience of my work life is hugely positive because of that, because I have those connections and that community that I enjoy working with, and I give and they give, and it's a reciprocal relationship.
Yeah, and I think when we were speaking before, the example I gave is, well, first of all, I don't see it as networking, and it may be the female perspective, but I genuinely see it as developing friendships. So for example, there's a colleague that I met that I used to work with like over a decade ago, and we still meet for coffee every couple of weeks. And, you know, 90% of the time we're just chit-chatting, catching up on, you know, life events or whatever. But she is an expert in her field. And every once in a while, if something's, I need her opinion on something, you know, I'll pick her brain, and vice versa, because we operate in different professional spheres. So I think that if you view it that way, sometimes for women, it's a lot more easier to see it as, well, I'm just developing my friendships rather than maybe networking might be seen as a bit of a dirty word or a scary word or something. The only thing that I would emphasize is in any relationship like that, it's very important that it's not a one-way street. And that you need to give as well as to take. And when you give, make sure that you give your time generously. Just to mention, one of the things that you touched upon earlier was, say, returning to work, especially after a long-term absence. And I think I'd say two points on that. One is to touch on those who might be out of office. I think that we need to make a conscious effort that colleagues are not out of sight, out of mind, you know, when they are on the likes of maternity leave, carers leave, etc. And also we don't make assumptions about people's careers based on what your perception might be, that we ask them, you know, so that they are the decision maker and that we don't effectively impose the decision on them. So the example that we spoke about previously was one of my friends that I've known for years, and she had just returned from her second maternity leave and she hadn't been back all that long, and she called for a meeting with her boss, and at that meeting she resigned to take on a much more challenging promotional role which she had achieved, and her boss was absolutely flabbergasted, and he had said that he expected when she called the meeting that she wanted to go part-time in line with her expanded, I suppose, family commitments. And I think that's a good example of maybe projecting conceptions of how you think somebody may want to behave in the future. Whereas I think that what we need to do is just get it from the horse's mouth effectively. The other thing that I'd mention is I'm conscious that we have a very diverse membership within the Compliance Institute, and I have absolutely worked for quite large organizations where they have very dedicated and very structured return to work programs, mentorship programs, etc. Where I am at the moment in Ireland is a much smaller organization, and the reason I mention that is that, you know, we wouldn't have those sorts of formalized structures in place. And the reason I reference that is that if anybody's on the call that says, well, you know, I don't have this opportunity to sign up to be a mentee, well, first of all, you know, perhaps you might want to avail of the program with the Compliance Institute. But also what I would say is it doesn't need to be a very structured where you go up to somebody and you say, are you, you know, will you mentor me, please? But these things often naturally develop, and it's just to be open to the fact that you could explore these opportunities without needing to label it as something, or without needing to have a very definitive program in place, especially if you are in a smaller company like myself.
Yeah, absolutely. Agree, Kathy. And I guess it struck me when you were saying about that you can have it all. I think not to underestimate the amount of choice you have. Even if you take something on and it turns out in 6 months' time you need to adjust that. We have lots of choice, and balance is possible. I think a lot of it is within our own gift, but it takes that discipline and self-awareness to execute well on it. I think it's important to say there's been times when I've said no quite a few times, because people might say, oh, does she just say yes to everything, and she gets involved in so many things. But there has been countless times I've said no, and it can be just as important to say no as yes. There's been times when I've been studying, getting married, having children, traveling, and the timing wasn't right for me. And I think the timing and the team you are working with aligning and being right for you is really, really important. And being clear on what it is you want to achieve, and setting out your goals and the direction you want to go in is very important.
Yeah, and I think just to echo that, the way I've heard it described is, which sounds scary, but it's not scary. It's getting comfortable with the chaos. And what I mean by that, as we've touched upon when we were speaking previously, is to get to a senior leadership position, you know, you have to be able to meet demands. You know, that's just a given. You have to have a good technical skill set. You have to be a good people person. So you might be used to always being on your A game, right? But especially when you move more into a leadership position, you know, you cannot control everything, right? You cannot do everything. And sometimes you just need to be aware of the fact that things might not go your way. And it's a much more granular approach in terms of, okay, right, today, what am I going to be able to achieve just today? That's what I'm thinking about. I'm getting through this. And that you don't always have to have everything completely in control, because I think as women, it's a comfort blanket that we like to have, and it makes us feel that you know, we're worthy. But I can guarantee you that it's like, you know, the image of the duck in the water and the little feet underneath are just paddling away furiously. You know, almost everybody that you meet that might get the persona of having it absolutely all together, I'd say that there's other dynamics at play that maybe you might not be able to perceive. If you can lean into that and be comfortable with that, it lets you manage much more competing priorities than maybe you might have felt overwhelmed with, let's say, earlier on in your career.
Yeah, I completely agree, Kathy, and that kind of ties back into letting go a little instead of over managing. And I think it's so important to be generous with your time and knowledge and your own lessons learned, and to remember that sharing developmental opportunities and delegating can be empowering for others as much as they can help you survive that chaos. So seeing the wider value add to facilitating others to step in, and yes, you have to let go a little in your mind and trust and verify that they are taking care of things, but it does help you, I guess, focus on other things and give something different, which is, to be fair, what probably people on your team will expect, that you will not be so much in the weeds, that you're taking a more leadership role and that you're enabling them to have your back covered in terms of the details. So that can be really challenging to make that transition, to let go somewhat of the detail, but I think it's key for everyone's growth.
Yeah. And I think the phrase I've heard it described as is, you know, rallying behind people, so that you're effectively helping to propel them to be better. And as we've spoken about previously, not only do you need to back yourself. I sound like, you know, that AIB ad. we back. What is it? We back brave or something like that. So
yes.
Excuse me if anybody from AIB is on the call, but I put it your praise. But what I mean is that you need to not only back yourself, but you also need to back each other. And I think that's the way, as a team, you cumulatively reach the success for you and for your organization. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely agree. You've made me think, when you think of backing yourself, it prompts me to think of the internal dialogue. Now, I know I've heard some people don't have an internal dialogue, and I'm amazed, because I certainly do. So apologies to anyone who is on the call. Internal dialogue, what is that? I admire the peace you might have, but certainly I have an internal dialogue, and it's controlling that and backing yourself. There's a book I read in recent times, Michael Singer, The Untethered Soul, and he does actually talk also a bit about the chaos you spoke about, Kathy, not in a corporate sense. This is just in a general life sense of letting go a little instead of over managing, but also speaks of the fact that you are not the voice in your head. And I actually had a laugh out loud moment reading that book, where he says, do you notice that the voice in your head answers itself back? You don't even need to interject. And I find that very true. And I think there's a multitude of well-published female voices on internal dialogue and internal conflict management that are also very well worth reading, because it can be that mental challenge of telling yourself, it's not worth the stress, I've too much going on at home, I'd rather not put myself out there. All those internal things that you can tell yourself, instead of saying, that'd be a really good opportunity for me, or I'm sure I can manage that. I suppose spinning it into more of a positive can do, where it is something that you really want and your gut is telling you it would make you happy. I'm a strong believer in happy self, happy family, happy wider life. I think if you try and go against your gut, it can also lead to more friction, to be honest. And I have experienced that mental challenge of finding yourself in a moment where you're the minority, and look, it happens to everyone, where they're in a room and maybe they're by far away the youngest, the oldest, you know, the whitest. It can be all sorts of other, like, that you are in the minority. And I can distinctly remember one moment standing in a room where I was different to everyone, and even more helpfully, it was a round table room layout, so I could see and they could all see. And I had this split second moment of, oh wow, what am I doing here? And like that moment of flight or fight, do I run? Should I never come back? Like, this is clearly not where me and people similar to me are. And that, or at that moment of, no, I'll stay here, and this is really interesting, and I'd like to see others come through from a more diverse background. So I think it's having that moment of kind of persevering, even where you feel like you're maybe in the minority, and being brave. I think to your earlier statement, Kathy, daring to be brave.
You're making me laugh, actually, because and the voice in my head is talking to me, because I remember very well now. I haven't thought about it for years, but when I was very early in my career, I remember being at an event again where everybody's around the table, and I was by decades the youngest, like absolutely. And the host of the meeting had put out, the little bowl with the mints in it, and I just couldn't help myself. So I was chopping down on the mint, and I then proceeded to choke on the mint. I was so embarrassed. But anyway, listen, we got through and we persevered. But no, in all seriousness, but when you talk about exploring that theme, what it reminds me of is I think something along the lines of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is where you can have a thought, but that doesn't mean that it's true, and it can pass, and you can challenge that thought. But the more you keep talking to yourself like it is the truth, in terms of I cannot succeed, I'm not good enough, that can then translate into reality. So I think the win-win is where you permit these feelings, which are valid feelings, but you feel free to challenge them and kind of let them move on. Yeah, I need to get that book recommendation, because I haven't read it. So pop me an email afterwards.
And like, even like when you think of like the likes of Serena Williams, even, right, taking a break to have a baby and going back to play tennis at like the top level, even she was having the same doubts, the same conversation, so it's not something that's unique to individuals. It's something that people experience even at the highest level of success in their field.
Yeah. I'm just conscious of time here, because we have about 10 minutes left.
Yep.
And we've, I think, one more thread that we've yet to pull from this conversation, which is that everybody in the compliance field is no doubt aware of the emphasis that the central bank places on culture. So what I'd like to maybe talk about briefly is the role that culture can play when celebrating women, and making sure that we give back effectively to women in the professional community. So what, from my own selfish perspective, what I would mention is that I think that we should advocate for both men and women to be very open and to promote a culture which normalizes speaking about external commitments, whatever they might be. For example, I need to leave work on time to collect my child, or something to that effect. The reason I reference that is because definitely at the beginning of my career, I felt like this type of commitment was very much unspoken, where you kind of felt that you had to skulk out the back door. The phrase I've heard nowadays, and it just speaks to me because obviously I'm a parent, is parenting loudly. And by doing that and showing people that these commitments are completely normal, and that they don't need to be swept under the carpet, that you effectively empower the next generation coming up to not have that shame around the fact that they have to balance multiple commitments, which are not just work commitments. Do you have any thoughts, Anya, in terms of culture and giving back?
Yeah, no, absolutely echo that, Kathy. And I think it's a far more healthier experience for everyone, where the person is strong enough and okay to share, like, I have to leave early, I'm looking after a really unwell parent or something like that. It naturally changes the dynamic and how you interact. Having that awareness and that sensitivity is so important, and to give and take in the workplace as a result. So I think COVID did a lot to improve that. We see a lot of negative things coming out of COVID, but I feel like COVID revealed the family for me, and that we all had these other parts to our lives. It makes them in a really unprecedented way, and I think after that it's something I'd be very keen to hold on to, that visibility around us having personal and professional life. So I was very appreciative of that, despite all the negatives that came with it. I think some of the things, and just with time in mind, I'll very quickly run through, Kathy. We've spoken a lot about value alignment, and I think that is central to me in terms of culture and aligning yourself with different organisations you might work with. Playing to your strengths is another thing. If you haven't already assessed, you can do free online courses to work out what your strengths are, and assessing how much they're aligned with your role or your place in your career. They can be very helpful. I remember a mentor once asked me to do that, a free online assessment of my strengths, and I didn't know what to do with them, and then he quickly explained that you need to look at them to see how much they're being supported in your current environment, and if not, what can you do to improve that. So that was really valuable to have that tool in my kit to assess and be very clearly critical of what was going on for me from a professional perspective. I think the highest performing teams I've worked with have been really transparent, as you described, Kathy. You know, they support each other. They kind of know what's going on with each other at a personal level, and a professional level, and that can really help things which are really pressure points from the regulator in terms of succession planning and career development, which we see time and time again, difficulties in that area where we maybe don't have transparency, we're not being clear on what's going on and what we might need to plan for in the future. And just very quickly to touch upon those traditional role modeling that you mentioned. I think it's so important for men and women that we try and flip that societal norm so that it's just as normal for a man to say, oh no, I lead our family life at home, I'm the primary caregiver at home, and my wife works. That is normalized completely, and that there isn't any stigma or anything unusual about saying that positive balance for everyone, and we're all individuals and want to do different things in our lives, that we all have space to do that and not feel like there's any bias or judgment around that. I'm just conscious of time, Kathy, if it might make sense to transition to kind of key takeaways before we open it up for Q&A.
Absolutely.
I think a few things that I'd like to reiterate, and if there were a short list of things to take away, making a practice for yourself. So make a practice of giving recognition in a real tangible way, calling people out for their good work, especially when they're not in the room, and to their manager. Making a practice of consciously delegating and enabling other people to get involved, to get them the progression and growth that they deserve, and making a practice of participating in mentorship, sponsorship and coaching opportunities wherever you can. I think secondly, the importance of your mindset. It's so important. Bigger picture thinking. Try to minimize rather than magnify, and let go a little and surrender a little to that chaos one step at a time. I think that's a really important one for me, as the second one there around mindset. And thirdly, the strength of that personal, authentic human connection is not to be underestimated. Take time to step out of the detail and look up from that and get connected with those around you. They would be my three parting takeaways.
Excellent. Well, I think honestly, I think we'll have to go for a drink at some stage, because I could have kept talking now for another hour or two. But Fiona, I wonder, have you been monitoring the Q&A box, and do we have any questions in?
Thank you very much, Kathy. Thank you very much, John. That was really, really good webinar. Yeah, we have a few questions in, so we have a couple of minutes there, so I'll just kick off with them. And so this question is referring back to the voice in your head that you mentioned earlier on, Anya. So how can professionals challenge self-doubt or imposter syndrome as they progress through their careers?
Start rewriting the script that internal dialogue is telling you. It's a lot of self-awareness work. So even noticing that you're having those thoughts is a good first step. I think I've become consciously aware of that and saying something different back. That's really nice. Thanks for your input, but I think, differently. I'm not a journaler. I've never really gotten into it, but I've heard people recommend actually writing it down. Can help. It's like to say it, to trap it. Can be a really good exercise as well. But I think the first step is the fact that you're aware of it is probably step number one. Step number two is changing that messaging and responding back. And if writing that down helps, surrounding yourself with people who say differently also can be really, really helpful.
Thank you. So another one in there. So you both spoke about careers not being linear. How can professionals recognise when it's right time to pivot or try something new?
I think really all you can do is to listen to yourself. And, you know, if you're unhappy in a role, I think you need to first of all understand the reason why. You know, is it that you're not being challenged, for example, or is it that you want to explore a completely different avenue? You know, maybe like, for example, we're in the support function, maybe you'd prefer to be more in the first line of the business and drive the policy more, you know. So without understanding first, I think, what motivates you, then it's difficult to understand where your next step should be. And I'd be very keen always to link in with your network, you know, in terms of those that are closest to you. And do they have any observations in terms of where they think your skill set might naturally be drawn to? Because often I think when we're so insular and in our own head, we think that there's only one way forward. Whereas if you speak with other people, I think often you might get a more rounded viewpoint in terms of, like we said earlier, it's not always black and white. You know, there might be a grey solution out there that, you know, never thought about before. So that's my 2 pence anyway.
Right, thank you. I just see another question coming through there. Sorry, bear with me. Oh, yeah,
And just
sorry.
to your point there, Kathy.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Just to your point there, Kathy, as well, in terms of that, sometimes having the courage to voice that internally, because you kind of could be cutting your losses, just leaving maybe not the right solution. You might feel like, I can't say this to my current employer, but if you could find a trusted person to confer with internally, oftentimes if you're just transparent and the way you position it, right, hint at that fact that maybe you want to try something different or move into a different function, for example. Again, don't predetermine how that conversation will go, because they might say, thank God you said that. Actually, we have somebody leaving. We've got a real pressure point there. We'd love if you would help, you know. So having the courage, I think, to voice that is important.
Very true. So that's the question there. How does one manage the family and work demands without anyone losing out?
It's really tricky, and it's something I'd be lying if I didn't say I internally battle with on my head. Am I doing enough on both sides? I have some non-negotiables, and I think that's really important, having your list of non-negotiables. And I've always taken the approach to annual leave and holiday leave that I do not check my emails or messages. I am offline, but leave my mobile. So if there is urgent communication, that there is a way of getting hold of me, but generally switching off really properly. So being really present when I'm in family time and vice versa, I think has helped have that balance. And again, having a non-negotiable where I will not miss the Christmas play or, you know, different events, and making sure that weekend time is meaningful. But it is something, I think, that mom guilt is the phrase used, that you do wonder. But I think it goes back to what Kathy was saying about trusting your gut. And if you're not happy, which I wouldn't necessarily be very happy if I had to sacrifice my whole career, and then how much fun would I be to be around if I'm not happy, you know? So it's having that realization and trying to strive, which is an ongoing battle for the balance there. And some weeks will go very much in the wrong direction, and you have to kind of reconcile back then. But it's being okay with that flex, that look, it'll be a little more work focused this week, but next week I'll make a conscious effort to be more present home wise.
True. So I have one more question, if that's okay. It's actually to both of you. So is it better to have a mentor, a coach, or a sponsor in place to advance your career?
I don't really think, I mean, Anya might have a different opinion, but my gut feel is it doesn't matter. What you need is your network, right? And you can leverage your network whichever way, because really you're kind of getting into semantics, I would suggest. I mean, unless you're professionally paying for somebody, right? In which case they might have different qualifications, etc. But you know, regardless of who it is, what you need is somebody challenging you and helping you to challenge yourself in terms of you can be better and progress further in your career. That is your champion. That would be, I would say, one of the differences between a a mentor who might help you be more internally focused versus a sponsor, for example, might be more of your champion perhaps when you're not in the room. But ultimately, I would say that you need a person, because no man or woman is an island. So just somebody to bounce things off, to have your back and you have their back, etc. Anya?
And I think, yeah, it's aligning it to your objectives, right? I might have a mentor who's helping me become more connected in a particular part of my sector, but I might have a sponsor internally who is, as you say, Kathy, the voice in the room when I'm not there, who is cheerleading me towards promotion or the next step. So it's having people in the right areas of your life to support you in getting to your objectives, I think. So having that alignment is really important. And I think if it's an internal upward trajectory you're following, having those sponsors internally at more senior levels is really critical, and something that I think if you don't set aside time to put in place, you will struggle potentially versus your peers. So again, it's about making human connection and having people who know you and rate what you do, speak of you when you're not in the room.
100%. Well, I'm going to close out there now. That's all the questions. So thank you everybody for joining us, and a big thank you to both Kathy and Anya for an excellent session. So really, really great. And like I said, it will be recorded and uploaded to our website if you want to look at it again. And I will send the CPD code on to everybody once I have it. So thank you everybody, and have a great rest of your day.